Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I hope you have made yourselves comfortable in front of your PCs and laptops and removed anything that might cause interference. Please take now a moment to adjust the volume if needed, because now I would like to get started by welcoming you on behalf of the IFZ to the 13th International Motorcycle Conference. As you know, this year's event has now been running for several weeks. The first session with the first round of contributions started more than a month ago on 1st of September. Another 8 sessions followed over the last 5 weeks. We received presentations on many exciting topics, and we found them all very, very interesting. The different topics, the existing papers, and also the great presentations are known to be the core of the IFZ conferences. So today I would like to welcome you to the closing session of this year's conference. Of course, I hope that you, your families, and your colleagues are all in good health. Unfortunately, as we know, we cannot take this for granted at the moment. The coronavirus has disrupted all our lives and has not spared our conference. Yes, everything is vastly different at this year's event from what we are used to. It's a strange feeling to be sitting here in front of my computer, and I'm sure it's a strange situation for you too. I missed our usual reunion and pleasant conversations outside in the foyer, and now I'm missing seeing many familiar faces. I cannot ask now if you had a pleasant and stress-free journey or thank participants from distant countries for the trouble they took to travel here. We had to cancel all that on this occasion. Everything is different and a lot of things are strange and unfamiliar. But some things have not changed. We are still pursuing the same goal as we always did, namely to make riding motorcycles, scooters and any other kind of powered two-wheelers safer. Nothing has changed about this. And so we are pleased that you have accepted our invitation to this year's conference and are attending it right now. We are grateful to you for doing so. I can't tell you how many nations are presented here at this moment during this live event, but I do know that participants from about 90 countries registered for the earlier sessions and nearly 3,000 participants accessed to the online topics. That our conference could take place at all this year and in this form is a tribute to our remarkable partners who, like all of us, are committed to making motorcycling safer. I would like to thank our long-standing partner, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation of the USA, with whom we have been bringing scientists from all over the world together since our first conference. Tim Boucher, former president of the MSF, joined us here for many years, and a lot of you will remember him fondly. Tim took his well-deserved retirement at the end of last year. Tim, if you are watching, thanks again, and we wish you all the best. I'm sure you already know Eric Pritchard, Tim's successor as president of the MSF, and not just because he appeared as a speaker at our last conference in Cologne. We will be welcoming Eric during today's online event, and he will say a few words about the MSF and the motorcycle safety situation in the United States. I would also like to thank my colleagues from ASEM, the European Association of Motorcycle Manufacturers, which we will be coming back to in our round table discussion. And there is the DVR, of course, also alongside us once again. The German Road Safety Council is an important partner in many of IFZ's activities, for example, in the area of advanced rider training. We have already achieved a lot together and will continue to promote two-wheeler safety together. I would also like to thank the IWM, the German Motorcycle Industry Association, which actively supports the IFZ in organizing these conferences and without whose help this conference would not have been possible. And would an IFZ conference be possible without advice from a steering committee? Of course not. I would therefore like to thank the committee's members. Their expertise has made this conference grow and flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, you will recall that in previous IFZ conferences, all of the contributions would still be in store for you at this stage of the proceedings, at this moment. You would have been curious to hear what the contributors were going to show and tell us. Well, your curiosity has already been satisfied this year, because you already know the contents of the 27 contributions. We deliberately refrained from arranging a marathon of lectures and instead decide to give you an opportunity to study all of the contributions at your own pace. I expect you set your own priorities depending on your interests and spend more time on some contributions than others. However, the contributions will remain available in our conference area so that you can catch up on the papers and related presentations even after the conference has finished. We distributed some excellent presentations to give us all a clear picture of the results of the author's latest research, and I would like to thank the editors for them. I and my colleagues think, and I suppose that you also think, that the contributions and the presentations in advance worked very well and have fulfilled and continue to fulfill their purpose very well. I'm also very grateful to the authors for this additional work. We will not be seeing any more presentations today, as that is not part of this year's concept for the conference. This brings us now to another important and very interesting item on the program, which has been a feature of the last 3 IFZ conferences, namely the roundtable discussion. This core element of today's event was mainly organized by colleagues from ASEM, the European Association of Motorcycle Manufacturers. Thanks to the excellent preparation led by Veneta Vasileva, ASEM's safety coordinator, I am sure that Antonio Perlot, its Secretary General, will ensure another interesting discussion this year. The title of this year's roundtable discussion is Future Mobility, PTWs at the Horizon 2030 and beyond. And now it can begin without further ado. Please stay tuned on your monitors now for a glance at the future. Let's all make sure that the public learns about these and future research results and that they contribute to making motorcycling increasingly safe so that everyone can ride as safely as possible. I wish you now an exciting and unforgettable conference on behalf of the entire IFZ team, and I look forward to an inspiring roundtable discussion and then to further exciting questions and answers about the contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for the roundtable. Please welcome Antonio Perlot and his guests.
Thank you, Matthias, for these kind words of introduction, and welcome also from my side here in Brussels, joined by my colleague Veneta Vasileva. indeed for this roundtable on future mobility. I said Brussels, but not only. I actually have guests also joining from Geneva and surrounding areas, Dr. Nan Tran and Edwin Bastiansen, and from Sweden, Jesper Christensen. I will now say a few more words to introduce the panelists. Matthias, we have taken note that you're looking for an interesting discussion. This is indeed what we have in mind. We are going to try and look at the Horizon 2030, not only from a safety perspective, but from the broader point of view of sustainable mobility, to which, of course, safety is a key element, but there are more than those included. And I'll start immediately by introducing Dr. Nan Tran, who's head of safety and mobility at the World Health Organization in Geneva. So Dr. Tran, or Nan, I will keep this roundtable rather informal. Nan has been was born in Vietnam and grew up in the US, where he graduated in international public health and also holds a PhD in health system research. He worked for the United States Department of Health and Human Services and later as a researcher at Johns Hopkins University. He then joined WHO, and for the last 6 years, he was manager of the WHO Alliance for Health Policy and Systems Research, where he coordinates basically the work in the areas of road safety, but as I said, also the mobility side. So I hope Nan will give us a good policy context to help us start from that point of view. Next will be Edwin Bastiansen, who's Secretary General of the International Motorcycle Manufacturers Association, IMA, based in Geneva. Edwin has 20 years of experience working in the research and development field, global regulations and licensing of advanced vehicle, traffic and transport technologies and systems. Currently Secretary General of IMA. He was before then working in ASEM here in Brussels. So it's good to see you again, Edwin. And he's also been, of course, working at TomTom and Ertico. So he has, I think, the broader perspective that can also complete the picture from the industry side on the international level. Moving then to Sweden, actually for probably a Danish gentleman that chose to move north, if I could say. I'd like to welcome Jesper. Jesper Christensen is director of the FIM, the Motorcycling Federation at international level, director of the Public Affairs Commission. He basically has been holding this position for now quite a few years, but also he's engaged both at European level in the discussions here in Brussels around sustainable mobility, but importantly is the Secretary General of the Swedish Motorcyclists Association, which is a very active player in these discussions. So I also look forward to hearing the point of view of users from Jesper. And then last but definitely not least, I already mentioned her. So Dr. Vasileva Veneta is our safety manager in ASEM. So she's connected from the room next door. And basically she's responsible for coordinating the road safety activities in ASEM with the members. She has been working before then for the Red Cross. But I think importantly within ASEM, she's been in charge of a series of very precise projects with clear deliverables. She'll be talking to us about those also today. So welcome all, and thank you for joining this discussion. I think we have 1 hour and a bit more available for the discussion. So the theme for today, we chose a wider topic than just safety. As I said, we look at future mobility, we look at the Horizon 2030 and beyond, because this is what policy is about today. And basically this is the future that is being designed as we speak, whether it's at European but also at international level. So in the first part of this discussion, I'd like to first ask Nan, if you could give us an idea when we talk about mobility at the Horizon 2030 and beyond, and obviously WHO focusing on human health in the wider sense. And if you look at the general policy concept, could you tell us more about the UN objectives when it comes to sustainable development goals and what those translate into for transport and mobility? Basically, what is sustainable mobility at the Horizon 2030 and how you see motorcycles playing a role in there? And obviously, there's been also COVID, which Matthias has also introduced at the beginning of his speech, which has disrupted our lives. what is the impact of that also for the short term at least? None.
Thanks very much, Antonio. That's a lot of questions, and I'll try my best to provide a succinct answer. So thanks very much for including me in part of this discussion. It's a pleasure to join this group. I think it's important for WHO and other UN agencies to take part in these discussions because one of the things that is becoming more of a priority for the UN is to make sure that we engage more proactively with the private sector and industries in order to achieve the broader development goals that you've mentioned. So just to go back to your first question, the Sustainable Development Goals, which as you know were put in place in 2015, really highlight an important thing, and that is really focusing on the integration of various policy objectives. As you mentioned, at WHO, we are mostly concerned about human health and well-being, but we also recognize that those goals are not mutually exclusive with other goals. And so when we talk about mobility and sustainable mobility, what we're really thinking about is the safety aspects of mobility, but we're also concerned about the environmental impact of mobility. We're also concerned about, for example, the impact of mobility and modal shifts on the physical activity of the level of physical activity of people in a community. So we recognize that it's not just about preventing road traffic deaths. It's about making sure that we have a transport system or mobility system that allows people to be physically active, that allows people to not spend all of their lives in a car, but also that it does not take a heavy toll on the environment. And so that's really what the SDGs do. They bring together these various different policy objectives into a set of goals. And it's really about integration. So in achieving this policy objective, we work with different agencies across the United Nations to align. That is to say, we cannot. That's to say that we are thinking both about safety and efficiency. We're thinking about safety and how it impacts the lives of people. And so that's really part of what the horizon for 2020 is. And a big part of that, of course, is rethinking the modal shift. I think this is a very central part of the future of mobility. It's not just about having cars. It's not just about having public transport. It's about allowing people to move about in different ways to achieve different types of commute. And one of the things that I think that COVID has done, going back to your question, is that it has really helped the global community think about mobility in a very different way. Before COVID, I think people recognized that, yes, we had different modes of transport, and yes, we needed to try to diversify. But I think what COVID has done is it has acted as a catalyst, and it has really accelerated the way we've been thinking about this because of the fact that people don't commute as much, because of the fact that people are trying not to be in public transport all the time where they're crowded. And because people are now recognizing the importance of micromobility and other modal shifts such as motorcycles and powered two-wheelers. So now we're seeing that people want to have more alternatives. And in fact, these alternatives can be positive to the way we think about mobility because it allows people to commute in different ways. You don't need to get into a car if you're only going a very short distance. So maybe that's a scooter, maybe that's a motorcycle. And all of these things, of course, need to be considered in the context of environmental pollution and the concerns about the environment, but also things in terms of how it impacts the way that people move about. So yes, I think that's the sort of bigger picture as we think about this. And the main message that I want to convey is really about the fact that the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals are really about integration. It's really about pairing safety with efficiency. It's about thinking about health and well-being in a very broader context. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that in order to achieve health outcomes, the 3.6 SDG target, which calls for a reduction of 50% in the number of road traffic deaths, we really do need to address things like efficiency. We really do need to address things like environment. We do need to address things like the way that cities are planned. All of those things are essential for us to get to our goal. So even though I'm concerned really about the number of deaths, I really recognize that it's important for us to work with other sectors in order to do that. And really, that's why we're here today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for the I think it covers the broad spectrum of what we would like to discuss today, and it's a perfect bridge to a question to Edwin from the international perspective at the motorcycle industry level. How can you react to the to what has just been outlined by Nan? What is the IMA perspective on this environment and the SDGs? What do they mean to motorcycling? Are there challenges and opportunities there?
Thank you, Antonio, for the opportunity to participate in this forum. And congratulations to IFZ and actually also to all participants to be able to join the interesting deliberations of IFZ in such a remote conference. So we have huge challenges with regards to this global pandemic, but it also brings us possibilities to get us closer together and be able to talk to each other through new technologies. So again, it's a great opportunity to be here, and thank you for that question. So as IMA is a federation of manufacturers or of manufacturer associations, we are the voice of motorcycle manufacturers. And with that, we have defined a mission which specifies safe, sustainable motorcycling. That means that when we look at sustainability and sustainable development goals, that safety is number one of the topics that we deal with. Because if we cannot make motorcycle appropriately safe, if motorcycling is not safe, we cannot sustain. It's very important, and therefore it's the upper priority of all our activities to improve the safety, to make and train our drivers, train our riders. And for that, we have developed a safety plan for action, which gives guidance to governments that helps explaining what kind of aspects should be addressed. And one of the most important issues that always is forgotten is to include motorcycling in the safety policies. So there are mobility policies in every country, but there is no general solution. You need to look at diversity of motorcyclists in every region, in every country, in every city. You need to look at the difference of infrastructure, the different technologies available, the technology advances that are available. So you need to look at motorcycling from very local different issues and define very specific policies. So that's from the perspective of safety. From other topics, of course, as Nan also mentions, is the environmental sustainability. For that, we look at the gaseous emissions of vehicles and developing a regulatory framework together with the governments so that step by step vehicles can become more efficient and become long-term sustainable when we look at the goals of 2050. So another point that is very important that we should not forget is, and that's something that has become more and more important in the last 10 years, and we see it more and more recognized, is the equity between transport modes. So when we look at motorcycling, when we look at public transport, automobiles, we need to consider that there is no competition between transport modes. They should all be addressed equally on their benefits, and we should allow an intermodality and multimodality across the systems. Now, lastly, of course, I should not forget to mention the joy and the passion that relates to riding. Many motorcyclists also really enjoy the use of their vehicles, and that's, of course, a part that's important when we think of motorcycling sustainability.
Thank you, Edwin. If I may now ask maybe Veneta to tell us, because we talked about safety, and you just mentioned in IMA work there is a policy paper which has been issued and renewed recently. Veneta, can you tell us what is happening on the European level? Because there are, of course, ongoing discussions in Europe regarding improvements to road safety with clear targets. ASEM has been involved in those for the sector. Can you give us a short summary of that?
Yes, thank you very much, Antonio. First of all, of course, after the adoption of the Valletta Declaration by all transport ministers of the European Union, the European Commission has set the target to halve the number of road deaths and serious injuries for the next decade, which is very important because it's the first time ever the European Union has a target to reduce the number of serious injuries next to the road deaths. And I'm very proud and happy to announce on 1st of October, the motorcycle industry launched its renewed safety strategy, which is an answer to the joint efforts of all stakeholders to contribute and to meet the EU targets. So our strategy launched on 1st of October, the Safe Ride to the Future, and I will give some more details about the content of the strategy. But what I would like to underline and to liaise with the words just shared by Edwin is that there are more than 36 million riders in Europe, most of them, great majority of them, using PTWs, motorcycles, scooters, mainly for commuting. They are also vulnerable road users alongside with cyclists and pedestrians. And we see that in the so-called new mobility post-COVID, the accent is put on encouraging cycling and walking. And with this strategy, we invite the policymakers at European, national and local level to embrace very positive and inclusive approach towards motorcycling and include motorcycle riders in the safety and mobility plan, because this is extremely important, not only to improve safety, but also to contribute to the sustainable goals of the European Union.
Thank you, Veneta. I'll just change hat for a second and make a short comment. What is also interesting in Europe, and I think it goes back to Nan, also what you were highlighting at international level, the fact that safety and mobility are really seen as one and not separate in silos any longer. Definitely there is a wider look on sustainable mobility, which is of course a trend in Europe, which is gathering speed, and partly down to the COVID, of course, having pushed this. But this is already a policy of the Commission. Veneta mentioned the fact that we are looking at these targets for reducing fatalities and serious injuries on the roads in Europe. There is also a increasing focus on the environment. We talk about the Green Deal in Europe, of course, which was announced by the Commission already at the beginning of the new mandate of President von der Leyen. We also understood that due partly to COVID and this acceleration, this catalyst you were mentioning, Nan, the Commission is now looking at increasing the targets they already had for emissions reductions to at least 55% compared to the 90s, so to early 90s. So the idea is to make, I would say, Europe a leader in this direction towards improving the energy efficiency at the Horizon 2030. And obviously that is also linked with digitalization, where we expect there will be a further focus on that. The idea being that Europe should be in the position to enable its economy to be at the forefront of this new reality we are currently in. So I think if I now move on to Jesper, we heard about the policy context. We also heard about what are the activities of the industry, I would say both at international and European level. If I look at the FIM and how motorcyclists see basically this horizon that we have just identified and these activities, what is the perception from the motorcyclists? Are these challenges? Are there opportunities? What kind of actions is the FIM running to basically position motorcycling at the Horizon 2030 as a sustainable mobility?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy that I'm in here, and I have been listening with great pleasure to what you have been bringing up. So there is no doubt that we are into a very interesting future. We have a very special situation now where we have the COVID-19. which are bringing in a complete new scenery in things. However, when we are looking at the all the fantastic presentations we had in the last month here at IFZ, we noticed a few things. So we noticed that we learn now that riders do not lean in the curves. We learned that the riders maybe don't brake. A part of them don't brake ahead of potential accidents. We learned that not all are having the legal issues okay, so driver's license, etc. We also learned that maybe we believe too hard, or riders believe too intensive on airbags. So all the new research are giving us a completely what do you say, a fantastic base for looking ahead. Because when it comes to the SDGs, I think we will have a major challenge to let all riders understanding what is going on, because we have a lot of riders who are deeply into the riding community, the classic structure. And here we will have a number of challenges, despite that all of us wants the better, a greener, and a more safe planet. So I think what will happen is that we all have to work very intensive. We have to explain very good what are we doing. And that's why amongst the SDGs, we see many of them are what riders have been asking for a long time. It is the safe system. And when we will start, due to all the research we have to understand in common, what kind of problem areas and challenges is it we are having. So this is very interesting. And what we see happening next to this, and particularly in FIM, we stress hard on making new sports with two-wheelers, and we are looking at all the new environmental friendly technologies coming up, and this means also new types of power two-wheelers. So we are very, I would nearly say, aggressive in making successes in these new areas. What our measures also show us is that there is a very large potential outside of motorcycling to use these new green vehicles for, what do you say, personal transportation. So we are clearly what Nan was speaking about, the modal shift. I even think that Edwin mentioned it. So we are a strong believer in this area. And we think that the motorcycle culture will have an open mind over time to access all this. And we are back again, the new groups which are not interested in the classic motorcycle culture, they are very keen on safety, they are very keen on the environment, and they are very open and they are asking for training. So I think the future we are having, particularly also accelerated by the wish of not getting infection of the COVID, is we see an increase in transportation on power two-wheelers. So we think the future is here. We are in the middle of it, and we are the architects of it. So it's very interesting.
Thank you, Jesper. So if I look at this, of course, we also are looking at the worldwide level being very different. The regions have different stages in advancement, whether it's from an economic or societal point of view. The share of mobility is very different. The modal split is different depending on the regions, and obviously when it comes to motorcycling, there will be also big differences between north and south, even within Europe. So maybe it's a question really to all of you. Are these differences that make it fundamentally different when you look at this Horizon 2030? Are we looking at a different horizon, or are we looking rather at a different timetable to reach the same kind of discussion topics? So this is maybe I don't know who wants to start. It's an open question, really. Not all at the same time, please.
I could give it a start if you want. Yes.
Yeah, please.
I think IMA is looking at it from a global perspective, and that's why it's of course a challenge to such a question. And you're giving the answer partly already by mentioning the incredible differences in the regions. The societies are completely different. Some societies, the people are much younger. In other societies, the economies are much more challenging and are much more affected by, for example, the kind of pandemics that we have today. We see some regions recovering timely, relatively quickly, and other regions having huge problems that even continue to persist before the second wave even arrives. So there are so much differences in societies, in economies, in climate, in vehicle park, in user, the training that the people have, the quality, all kinds of issues that require attention when you look at how we can see motorcycling develop in the future. And so for that, yes, it's a very step-by-step approach. You see some regions taking a lead, for example, on environmental aspects. You see Europe taking a lead, developing Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 5 vehicle requirements for the environmental performance. And you see how these requirements progressively are then adopted in other regions. But in any case, it's clear that the direction is the same. But you need to keep vehicles affordable. You need to assure that the technologies are mature in these regions, that manufacturing can follow and users can use it. So I think you've given much of the answer, mentioning the huge differences between the regions.
Yeah. Thank you, Edwin. So in a nutshell, there are differences, step-by-step approach, and at the same time, the direction is the same. Nan, would you have a similar view? Would you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So I have a similar but slightly different view. I mean, I agree with Edwin very much that there are fundamental differences in climate, which dictate, very different responses simply because the nature of the climate. I mean, as you said from the introduction, I'm from Vietnam, and I grew up in the United States, and the way that motorcyclists are used in Vietnam and in the United States are vastly different. I mean, we all know that. What is important, however, is despite these differences, I think the fundamental principles of how we need to think about this is very much the same, irrespective of the context. And that goes back to what Jesper was saying about the importance of the system and the importance of the context. Veneta had mentioned, the word vulnerable road user, and I just want to take a moment to just talk about that. I actually don't like that word anymore because it puts a lot of emphasis on the user. It makes it seem like as if there's something special about a motorcycle that makes him or her more vulnerable in the event of a crash. And it's actually not the motorcyclist that makes him or her, or the bicyclist that makes that individual more vulnerable. It's the context. It's the system. So if you look in Amsterdam, bicyclists and motorists are the dominant sort of mode of transport. I would never describe a bicyclist as being vulnerable in Amsterdam, but I might describe, a bicyclist as being vulnerable in Vietnam, for example. And again, it's about how we frame the situation, and it's really about strengthening the system and not making the focus about the user behavior. I've mentioned this before. I did my training in Malaysia, and motorcyclists comprise roughly 50% of the motorized transport in Malaysia. And of course, Malaysia was one of the first, was the first Asian country to actually have a dedicated motorcycle lane. And if you've been to Malaysia, you'll see now there's a lot of problems because there's a lot of reports that are saying motorcyclists are not complying because they're not staying in their motorcycle lane. But there's one single motorcycle lane, and then the rest of the road is allocated to cars. So if you think there is 50% of the motorized traffic is motorcyclists, why do you only allocate this much of the space of the roads to them? Again, it's really about thinking about how do we design systems that actually are adaptive to the way that the roads are being used and how people are choosing to move about. So yes, in certain regions, in certain climates, motorcyclists, are going to be the predominant part of the road users, and maybe in those settings we need to allocate more road space to them, Or in other settings, it might be appropriate to have only one lane because you actually have fewer motorcyclists. But the point is that we have to think about the system and the dynamic between the system and the road user. And the more that we emphasize the road user as being vulnerable or the behaviors, the more we look to change that person's behavior, or we look to change and we say they need to wear more visible clothing, rather than thinking about how do we design a system that actually protects them. And again, I always go back to saying we need to put the focus on the system. So instead of saying vulnerable road users, I would prefer to say, if we start saying the conditions that make motorcyclists more vulnerable in certain settings over others, the conditions that actually make bicyclists and pedestrians more vulnerable. There's nothing genetically about people that make them more vulnerable. It's actually the system that makes them vulnerable. And I think the response needs to be framed in that way.
I think that's a very enlightening comment. If I remember years ago in Europe, we actually moved from being considered, the riders were considered users at risk, which was even perhaps a step further in the wrong direction, to being vulnerable road users. So how do we now move to this becoming a more positive message about the need to integrate? I think that's a really interesting point. I see Veneta was raising her hand.
Yes.
Maybe we move now to, we're actually moving to the discussion section in a very natural way. I'll leave you the floor, Veneta.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Nan, I absolutely agree that it's a matter of changing the system and creating an appropriate system which creates favorable conditions for all kinds of road users. So therefore, I said also that the main call from the motorcycle industry, for example, in Europe, is the collaboration with policymakers, and we would really expect them to create a more favorable environment for safer motorcycling by including motorcycle riders in different sort of safety and mobility transport plans. And it is also true that we all have the same agenda, let's say at the horizon 2030 in different parts of the world, but even in Europe there are great differences in terms of safety performance, for example, between different countries. So it means that it's good to create this general system which accommodates the needs of different road users, but at the same time, maybe there is a need to identify concrete national challenges and also try, of course, to outline appropriate countermeasures which could make significant contributions and improve safety for all road users.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
you see in this
Jesper,
this is very interesting what is raised now. Thank you, Nan. And then we are back at the Sustainable Development Goals again, because here we are looking also about procurement, which is meaning how do company buy services, and when we look at a large pile of transportation in a number of countries on the planet, it's done on powered two-wheelers. And the companies hiring these transporteurs or riders going out, they have basically no responsibility for the rider and his safety as an employee. So here I think is a major challenge, and this is the new challenge we have in road safety, is that it sticks together with a lot of different items which we normally didn't care about because we had large problems understanding what is road safety for powered two-wheelers. And I think we are getting close to that point now. So it's a very good development.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesper. Maybe just picking on that, we acknowledge that there are differences between the different regions in the world. Obviously, there are different steps we are following. Probably all of the regions are following, but there are specificities. And if you look at the usages of motorcycle, if you look at mobility, let's go back to mobility today, and also try to project it at what it might be 10 years from now. Obviously, there is urban core city mobility is one thing. There will be the commuting into the city, which is another one. There's, of course, rural riding. There's also leisure riding, as in mainly in the US, as Nan was highlighting earlier. So we're looking at a situation where the usage of two-wheelers might differ further in the future. We talked about, for instance, cities also changing their policies towards the vehicles. So at the horizon 2030-35, we can also expect there would be more restrictions on the usage of cars, for instance, trying to favor smaller vehicles. So again, that's an element that we should keep into account. And then if I look now at what you just mentioned, Jesper, you mentioned also procurement, so professional use of motorcycles in some countries today. I mean, we're looking at individual mobility for, I would say, the usage of the rider of his own motorcycle. We're also seeing more shared services when you are looking at the management of mobility in the future, and the cities will be more shared. So I think there will be in the next 10 years a lot of changes. Question is, are there challenges that need to be tackled? What is needed for the, let's say, for the motorcycle to remain or even to become more of a solution in that environment? Maybe I leave the floor to Nan, if you could give us at least your feeling on those topics.
Well, this is a trick question in some ways, because I think that, and this is just, I should clarify, this is my personal opinion on this. I think that motorcyclists struggle because there is a lot of, there's what you just said, Antonio, is that motorcyclists comprise a very diverse group of individuals. They're not one. However, the perception of motorcyclists is that they are one group of people. The perception of motorcyclists is that they are the ones that engage in risky behaviors. They are the ones that are responsible for a lot of crashes. If you are a driver, you see the motorcyclists or the scooters weaving through traffic. And again, this is the reputation that motorcyclists have. And I think that it's perhaps an unfair characterization of motorcyclists, because they are very diverse. You know, we often refer to he when we talk about motorcyclists, when in fact in Vietnam, half of the motorcyclists are actually women. So again, I think one of the things that we have to change is to understand that motorcyclists are very diverse, and they're not one, sort of a stereotype that is often portrayed. And then I think to the point exactly is that to understand that, I think the biggest challenge for motorcyclists is to make the case, or to demonstrate. I don't know that you have to make the case. I think you have to demonstrate essentially that motorcycling or use of power two-wheelers is a necessary part of the modal mix that we will see in the future. I mean, going to Jesper's point, most of the delivery services that we see in Geneva are done by motorized power two-wheelers or even electric bikes now. So I think it's about framing this, not about, in terms of the rights of motorcyclists, about the fact that the future is multimodal. We are not going to have a future where it's going to be only dominated by cars. I think that is no longer acceptable. I think people are recognizing that we don't want to have that as a future, and the future ultimately is going to be a multimodal. But another point that I wanted to just bring up right now is related to what COVID has helped us to realize, is that, the notion of commuting has also changed. Before it was okay for people to envision to have a commute that was 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes going to the office. Now, I think, if you ask most of us, do you want to travel 30 minutes each way to the office? I think most of us would prefer not to. And I think that's changing how we think about, how we live our lives and the need for us to move about. More and more, there are cities that are adopting this idea of a 15-minute city. That means that you're able to go most places within 15 minutes. And if you try to think about it in that way, it's not going to be through getting into a car and fighting traffic to get there. And it may be more likely that you'll be able to achieve that 15-minute sort of living style through micromobility and the use of power two-wheelers. So for me, the main sort of challenge that is facing the field right now is to demonstrate that this is actually part of the modal mix that's necessary to achieve a better environment, a better living quality of life, and to also get past this notion that somehow motorcyclists are all these young guys that are reckless and dangerous and riding really, really fast, and that actually use of motorcyclists and power two-wheelers is actually a part of achieving these SDGs, and is actually used largely in most countries for daily commuting, not for sort of the leisure sports and riding really fast on highways.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Who wants to take it on from there? The users or the industry? I'm looking at Jesper, you're smiling. Up to you.
No, I'm smiling. It's because I think Nan, you bring in a number of very nice perspectives, and what I noticed recently is the shift after the COVID-19 that you care about your safety in another way. So who could have imagined just half a year ago that suddenly we would start to say that power two-wheelers, motorcycles are a safe mean of being because you are at no risk when you are on your own riding. So we see large cities are suddenly making motorcycle parking for free, meaning that please take the power two-wheelers and don't use the public transportation and take the risk of infecting other people. So this is for me a new way. I also think we will see another thing which will happen automatically due to all this, because now we are sitting here. We didn't travel to Cologne this year and meet physically. We used the technology. We had the technology for years to have this type of meetings, conferences, but we didn't do it because we had some kind of we didn't like it. But now we see it's working efficient, and I think in the motorcycling world we will see a large pile of the anxiety there was for new ITS and automatically systems. I think we will see that go away too. So we will have. I think we are taking a tremendously step ahead right now, and it's going very smooth. So the SDGs are really coming in.
Thank you, Jesper. Maybe if I move on to Asem to Veneta, we talked about what needs to be done on the safety side for integrating two-wheelers. Also, I think to reach out. I think Nan, you were mentioning reaching out to the users with an S because they are different, and we need to sort of try to cater for the different needs. Could you tell us a bit more about what we're doing on road safety, in particular with this aspect? I think perhaps beyond the vehicle itself, but also looking at training issues.
Yes, of course. At the core of our strategy is, of course, technology, but our strategy is reflecting truly the safe system approach and trying to create a favorable environment for safer motorcycling. So it goes to high quality post-license training. It goes to cooperation with stakeholders at national level and covering different topics like infrastructure, of course, personal protective equipment, training, and other challenges. In terms of technology, I would like just to mention a few words about the future outlook of the industry. The industry sees the vehicle-to-vehicle communication as a very promising path to improve motorcycle safety, because we know that in the majority of accident situations are due to the human errors and mainly made by the car drivers who overlook motorcycle riders. So the possibility for different kinds of and types of vehicles to communicate into the future will give a digital conspicuity to motorcycles and will improve significantly the safety performance of the riders, and therefore the industry has been working very actively through the Connected Motorcycle Consortium to elaborate the basic specifications for CITS. But okay, let's go back to your question. Of course, the industry has always been supporting lifelong training, and this was one of the reasons to establish the European Motorcycle Training Quality Label. This is an initiative running by 3 organizations: the motorcycle industry, the German Road Safety Council, and the International Motorcycling Federation. This is a voluntary process and evaluation of high quality post-license training courses. Only for 3 years we have managed to certify 31 programs in different European countries. We have many new programs which are under evaluation, but unfortunately, because of the current pandemic situation in Europe, the evaluation process is currently suspended. But we hope that next year we will have new label holders joining the group of excellence. And we really try to promote the high quality training and focusing on safety training. This initiative was and it has been strongly supported by the European Commission, and last year the European Motorcycle Training Quality Label received the Road Safety Award in the category voluntary commitments, which was a great recognition for all the efforts that we have been doing to promote a high quality training, which we are convinced could contribute to the better safety performance of the riders.
Thank you, Veneta. I think this is one of the things, Nan, you were referring to, the importance of cooperating with different sectors, and it is definitely something we think is part of the answer, I think, to achieve improvements. If I if I look at the and I move to a different part, because we touched upon safety a lot. We mentioned at some point, of course, the fact that sustainable mobility would also be about making, let's say, evolution progress on the environmental side. I think, Jesper, you mentioned something on that, on new technologies. We heard about new technologies for safety from Veneta, and that's clearly one side of the discussion. But if you look at the urban environment and how micromobility and small power two-wheelers, of course, will be able to play perhaps a further role due to the electrification process at the Horizon 2030. Maybe if I again move to Nan to just set the scene for that, how do you see these electrification trend for smaller vehicles playing a part? And then we can perhaps move also to the industry and to the users.
Well, it's already happening. If you go to China, you'll see that when they talk about e-bikes, they're not talking about the motorized assist bicycles that I have in Geneva, for example. They're talking about a power two-wheeler that is both quiet and clean. So that's already happening. And I think that's the point, is that I think, whether, people, however you define sort of a power two-wheeler, in different contexts, that's how people are choose to move about, because it's easier for them and it is more efficient for them to move about using a power two-wheeler that's electrified rather than getting into a car, because of the fact that buying a car is very difficult in China. You need to have a lottery to get a car. And that's the point that I would like to make here. I actually think, if I could be so bold as to say, I think the motorcycle industry and your groups should be. I would encourage you and I would challenge you to be even bolder. While I think it's important to have safety standards in place and the technology that Veneta described, I would even say, why do you even have motorcycles or power two-wheelers and cars on the same roads in the same sections to begin with? I would like to imagine a future, if this is a trend where we're going to see more and more power two-wheelers, for us to make a call for a clear separation of road infrastructure that allows motorcyclists not to be in the same pathways as cars or automobiles are. But I think, again, we are working with the assumption that as we evolve, we're going to evolve using the same infrastructure and we're just going to make little fixes here and there to make it safer. I would like for us to say, okay, here's an opportunity for us to really rethink mobility. And if we're really open to rethinking mobility, that should mean that we are open to actually fundamentally changing the system. And I think that we should be calling for that. I think it's not enough to say, yes, let's have, the vehicle communication. Don't get me wrong, I think it's very important, but I would like for us to go much further. And I think when you look at the trends, you look at what's happening in Asia, you look at what's happening in countries like China, that's already happening. Micromobility and electrified scooters are taking over. And right now, the challenge that you have in China is that there is not enough infrastructure to support them. And they're being seen as a problem. But I don't think that's a fair characterization, because it's not them that's the problem. It's the fact that the infrastructure is inadequate and lacking to support their needs. And if more and more people are going towards that, then why aren't we allocating more and more of the infrastructure, the urban infrastructure, to allow that mobility to happen in a way that's both safer, but actually more efficient for everybody? So I think we need to be a lot more bold, and we need to be a lot more sort of, sort of willing to challenge the existing norm if we're really going to evolve in the way that you're suggesting we ought to, Antonio.
Yeah. That's a really inspiring comment, I must say. I think one of the challenges we have is the limited space there is, and that doesn't mean that this kind of shift you're referring to could not happen. The issue is for cities that have been in place with a certain infrastructure and limited width for lanes, it will be a tough struggle, I would say, but definitely something that should be looked into. We see, for instance, connectivity, and I take the point of the CMC. I mean, we see connectivity as a way, at least, to achieve a stepping stone, maybe in that direction, so that we can make sure there is a better dialogue between the vehicles. And obviously, the more space we can achieve for smaller vehicles and lighter mobility and soft modes, I guess that will also help in going in that direction. If I thought you mentioned something about electrification in the cities, and in particular also the fact that it would be both clean and address the issue of noise. This is an issue that is becoming more lively in the public debate. Obviously, citizens, also due to COVID, most likely, the whole environment was very calm. There wasn't traffic as much as before. But so the issue of noise from transport and also noise from motorcycles has become higher on the agenda. And there are initiatives in some parts of Europe to actually limit the use of motorcycles. So this is again something I think we are aware of as an industry. I take off my moderator's hat, and there's a lot of work ongoing now to try and address this issue. Again, here part of it is also a solution coming from the users. Of course, you mentioned Nan. We're not one group of individuals, and at times, let's put it like this, the loudest individual will bring a bad image for the rest. So I turn to Jesper, not as the loudest individual, but as the representative of the users. What can you tell us on that?
Well, I think if we look at all the new micromobility, it's very easy. It's a sector which will be much larger than what motorcycling are in a number of countries. And I think it's natural that the people in the micromobility area will be part of the, what can we call it, the new motorcycle culture. I think that's very obviously. So we will have a number of challenges. How do we adapt this? How do we make our systems up? But I think we are very good prepared in many ways, particularly like Vineta said about training, because many of these people would like some kind of training, consumer assistance, etc. So I think it's a process which are starting right now. And again, if when it comes to roads, I just have to say I met a few weekends ago. I met in the hotel in the area where I live, which is a very nice touristic area. And there I met two friends from the road safety environment, and I was looking and said, "What are you doing here?" And they laughed and said, "We are on vacation. We are on touring." And they were out touring at their electrical bicycles. And what they did was they did exactly what we do on our really big 1000cc motorcycles. And I don't see there was any difference. And some of the things we talked about was just what Nan brought up. And that was, hey, the roads don't suit us. The infrastructure are not good for us. It's not safe. So I think we will have a lot of challenges how to create the infrastructure for the future. This is really a hot cake.
Yeah. Yes, good point. And I think there's a lot of similarities if you look at, of course, bicycles, and if you move up into powered assisted vehicles and into mopeds, all the way to motorcycling. At the end of the day, it's basically the same dynamics, two wheels, the same kind of emotions you can get from using the product. So it's a useful tool, but it's also something that is adding to a pleasurable lifestyle, let's say. If I try to now move to perhaps, let's say, a more interactive part of the program. I'm looking for the feed on YouTube, and I must say, for the time being, either I have an issue and I don't see the comments that are being posted. But in the meantime, as we try to sort this, and I'm also checking on Facebook, is there anything you would like to ask yourselves? Let's say another member of the panel that you would like to ask direct questions. So just looking at, for instance, Edwin, I was actually going to bring you in, so you're quicker than me.
Yes, well, I'll take two points. First, I think I would like to emphasize further the point of urban mobility and the urban policymaking, which, especially for motorcycling, is becoming more and more important. And as we have Nan sitting with us here as a policymaker at the global level, and giving also guidance to regional and national and urban stakeholders, I think what we hope is that the urban policymakers, they will not only concentrate all their efforts on the micromobility, for which they really have, of course, they see a huge shift and they see a very rapid acceleration of developments. But they should not forget including properly the motorcycling policies. There was an example mentioned about motorcycle lanes, which exist in Malaysia, which exist in Taiwan and other regions. But the urban stakeholders, the majors, they don't know these kind of opportunities. They need to be educated on how motorcycling can be complementary to their local mobility solution. And so I think we have a great challenge in the next 10 years to continue our efforts on that point. While, of course, saying that motorcycling is not just an urban thing. Motorcycling also involves long distance riding. It's a very important part of motorcycling as well. But I think now that we recognize that the local policymakers, the majors, are receiving more power, more visibility, there's a lot of communication on what they're doing. We have a great challenge and task to work with the local policymakers on these topics. Then I would have a question in response to your question, Antonio, is now that we have Nan with us, he has been in the lead of the ministerial conference that was concluded in February last year. And this was also successfully concluded again with a resolution in August, which is calling for a plan for action for the decade. And I think Nan will be probably leading that effort. So I would like to ask for the opportunity for Nan to give us his first ideas on what that would mean for motorcycling, or could mean for motorcycling.
Whoa, that's
yours.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Edwin, for that big question. So just a bit of background. I mean, in September of this year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution on road safety, which basically proclaims that the decade from 2021 to 2030 will be a second decade of action. And as Edwin has said, WHO and the UN regional commissions are being tasked with the development of a global plan of action to help member states achieve the goal of reducing deaths by 50%. We are basing the development of the plan on a number of things, including work that was done in the lead up to the ministerial conference in Sweden, as well as assessments of what has taken place in the last decade and what we've learned. And I think nothing will be a major surprise. I mean, I will repeat basically what I've said to you before, and I think one of the main things is in this next plan will be integrating road safety as a broader agenda within mobility and sustainable mobility. And achieving that is really about having a modal mix that's appropriate to the context and the way that people use the roads and the way that people want to move about. And so it's really emphasizing that point. So from my perspective, if you look at the trends worldwide, if you look at the trends in different regions, what we're seeing, in fact, is a resurgence in the use of of bicycles and powered two-wheelers, especially if you start to consider that e-bikes are now sort of part of that group. And my response is I think that there is undoubtedly going to be a role for powered two-wheelers in the future of mobility. I would put the challenge back to you, Edwin, and even Jesper, in terms of, I think you have said it exactly right in your setup. I think the challenge for the industry is reframing the narrative. Up until now, I think there's been a push to sort of defend motorcyclists as not being reckless, guys driving fast and doing all of these bad things. But I think that's not the argument. The argument is really about reframing motorcycle use or powered two-wheeler use as a part of the future of sustainable mobility, as a part of the necessary modal mix. And as you see, the the climates are getting warmer everywhere. People are drawn to these things because it does allow them to achieve smaller commutes in a more efficient manner, in a more clean way, and it's less costly as well. So I think there are issues. I think, Antonio, you mentioned at the very start, there are issues related to equity that do come into play when you talk about countries in other parts of the world. And so I think, it's not about denying whether or not powered two-wheelers are should be there. It's about accepting that they will be a part of the modal mix that's necessary as we move forward. But I think that's the framing that the industry needs to adopt. And I think that's the framing that's going to resonate a lot more with the policymakers. It's about saying that this is actually good for your urban planning. This is actually good for physical activity. It's good for encouraging people to use public transport because it allows you to bridge things and so forth. But I think that's the argument that you need to make. And I would encourage, in fact, that the motorcyclist industry, if I were really wanting to be controversial, the thought that was going through my mind was that, if you talk about the urban roads and the urban space issue, it's really about cars and motorcyclists. So you have two industries that are basically vying for the same space. And I would say, hey, why doesn't the motorcyclist industry take this up as an issue and say, look, we need to fight the auto industries, because basically the way that the roads are designed is to accommodate cars. And that's driven by the fact that the auto industry sort of dominates mobility discussions, and that has to change.
Very, very interesting, and I think we, if I take the ASEM view on things, we've been pushing really for the integration of two-wheelers in the mobility system. I think this is not only important for the safety of the vehicles, but indeed also to ensure that we are part of the future system as an alternative, as a positive contribution. I think that's what I take from your words, Nan. I wrote down, reframe the narrative and make sure that we are part of future sustainable mobility. I would say that's really what we're aiming to achieve. I think with safer vehicles, with cleaner vehicles, with vehicles that meet perhaps the needs of a wider customer base, let's call it like that, not only the typical image of what a rider is, but also widening also to people that are not perhaps using motorcycles today. So I think that's really a not controversial at all, actually very, very supportive. So I appreciate that. I was actually looking at the comments I received, and I had one from let's say a well-known contributor in the IFZ events, that is Elaine Hardy, as basically is also underlining, Nan, your words. It is not about vulnerable road users, it's about the system. The system is the problem, not the vulnerable rider. We need to work on the system to improve it. So I think it goes also in the same direction. Any more questions from the panel, as I'm waiting for more coming from the social media? Questions or comments? Benetta.
I just wanted to complement the discussion about the infrastructure and sharing the road between different road users, and to ensure that there is enough space for motorcycles. We should not forget that Europe is moving very fast to connected and automated also mobility, which will bring an additional challenge to sharing the road, because we know that the automated vehicles may also have the privilege to use special lines. So it will be a big challenge in Europe to tackle the issue of this mixed traffic with having partly automated vehicles, vehicles who are highly automated, then you have users who are not automated at all, then you have connected vehicles, then you have cyclists, pedestrians, motorcycle riders with their different needs. And in terms of redesigning the mobility and the traffic plans in the cities, it will be really very challenging to try to find a good balance between all different transport modes, but all different needs that they require in the future. So this is one of the biggest challenge which is coming in the next year in the European Union, and it concerns, of course, not only motorcycle riders, but all kind of transport modes in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Edwin, from your perspective, and I mean, we will have then to draw to a close, I think, but from your perspective, is there anything different when you look at the bigger picture beyond Europe? What needs to be taken into account for the, let's say, the integration of the rider in the Horizon 2030 mobility?
In the big, it's a very broad question.
I know.
let me put it in context of the point made by Nan, because he made an exciting point. We are called upon by the World Health Organization to position motorcycling in context of mobility, which is a very complex issue, because the mobility solutions in the regions are very different. So we fully support this kind of discussion, but there is not a global standard approach that we can give as a global guidance. So that's why we are, of course, organized with member organizations in the regions, such as ASEM, developing their regional plan and working with the regional authorities and local authorities on how to position the mobility solution of power two-wheelers in this region. And I think the challenges are, the narrative is regional because of these complexities and differences. I think that's a key point I wanted to add here.
Thank you. I have a question here, which is coming from the feed. It says, I'll read out: in the future, with increased automated cars, could this provide added motivation for increased power two-wheeler use? If car behavior becomes more predictable, the perceived reduction in risk could encourage converts from people who were nervous previously. Conversely, could more automated vehicles traffic bring new risky behavior or dangers? Who wants to take that question?
Well, I think you are aiming at me being the riders.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think, yes, of course it can happen. Of course it can. I mean, the riders are very differentiated. All people in traffic are differentiated risk takers. So of course it's logical that if you know exactly what another vehicle will do, well, then you may change a new behavior if you are a risk taker. It's obviously to me, but I have no science to base it on.
Okay. Does anybody want to rebound on that?
Yeah, maybe a point with regards to the automated driving, which we see is a huge priority in many regions in the world, to develop the technology and develop the regulatory framework to allow these advanced vehicles or with very advanced technologies as soon as possible on their roads. Obviously, there are a huge amount of challenges to organize, and we see huge resources being spent by governments and car manufacturers. And we as motorcycle industry closely monitoring these developments. And of course, emphasizing the importance that these technologies properly detect these the two-wheelers and vulnerable road users as pedestrians and bicyclists. So far, there is a lot of research ongoing on this, and the regulatory framework does seem to take that into account.
Yeah, thank you. So we are 1 hour 20 into the discussion. I think I would like to ask you if you have a final comment or question before I move on to try and draw some really very general conclusion on this interesting debate. Veneta.
Yes, if you permit me, I just would like to invite the audience to go to the new ASEM website, which is completely dedicated to the ASEM safety strategy, where the people could read the strategy, they could find the summary, some high-level recommendations, and some infographics and many other things. The website is interactive and very attractive, so please go to roadsafetystrategy.asem.eu. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more promotional messages, please?
No promotional messages from me, but if I could just say, I mean, I think my closing words would be that I really do believe that we are at the cusp of an important change, or potentially at the cusp of an important change in how we think about mobility and transport. And I think we have the opportunity at this point to really be bold in how we reimagine that new vision for mobility. And I would hope that we don't limit ourselves to finding solutions to make the existing system work, but rather allow ourselves to be open enough to actually dare to reinvent the system, if we will. Because I think that's really where the big change is going to happen, and I do think that that future includes a multimodal mix, which does include power two-wheelers.
Thank you, Nan. Edwin and Jesper, from your end?
I can say that I think what we hear from Nan and what my feeling is within the last year, particularly after the Stockholm Declaration, I think the motorcycle riders should be very happy, because it seems to me that we are starting to get a much better understanding of motorcycling and understanding of the needs that motorcycle riders have. I also think that motorcycle riders being, open to speak about some of the behavioral things which some of us are doing in the traffic, that these things are on the table and it's discussed with a very open mind. I think the new sort of mobility, micro-mobility, whatsoever, which are coming in now, is putting motorcycling on the agenda for how we design the infrastructure, how we create the safe system. So riders should be very happy because of what is going on right now. And I think I will ask the riders to support what is going on, support the stakeholders which are involved. That's my comment.
Edwin, any final words from your side?
I think this kind of exchanges where we have industry users and policymakers sitting at one table and exchanging on different perspectives and also pointing at others, maybe you could look at it from this perspective and provide suggestions as we just received from Nan. I think it's fantastic, and we need to continue this kind of initiatives as often as we can at the local level, at the regional level, national level, and at the international level, because this is the only way how we can really understand each other. And I think also we've achieved a lot in this last decade, where we talked about getting recognition of motorcycles, where our message has been to ask for recognition of the economic contribution of two-wheelers. And we see also the calling for equity, the calling for recognizing motorcycles as a future of mobility. So I think we have a very exciting future ahead together. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. So I'd like to now move to some final words of conclusion. I actually was going to echo what you just said. I think this debate has been, of course, very general. We touched upon so many different aspects, which, when you look at the horizon 2030 and beyond, of course, are all going to be dependent on many factors, which are external factors for each individual, I would say, stakeholder that is concerned. But at the same time, we all have, I would not say a responsibility, but we have an ownership of the solutions. I think it's a much more positive way of looking at things than working in isolation about these solutions. So if I look at what we've been discussing, what I really take from the discussion, Nan, is in particular your encouragement to the sector to reframe the narrative and make sure that motorcycle use, and in the wider sense of motorcycles, I would say all our vehicles are part of the future sustainable mobility. And this is down to the efforts that we can all play together to really position the vehicle at the Horizon 2030 as an answer to the policy challenges that are there. These are not only international challenges, they are, as you said, Edwin, they're national, they are very often very local. And at the end of the day, we need to basically talk to policymakers. We also need to talk to citizens and allow them to understand what is the benefit of using the vehicles, what is the opportunity that is in there also for them if they choose to start using a two-wheeler. To do that, of course, we have a lot of possibilities. We start from technology, which is clearly let's call it the core business of what we do as a sector, as an industry, but we can also extend beyond that. We can move into the areas where perhaps it is less likely that the car industry would do due to the nature of the vehicle. We need to think about how can we protect the user, having in mind the structure of the vehicle requires a lot more being done on active safety, making sure the rider is aware of risks, making sure that the training options are there to basically improve the overall safety awareness of the rider. So that's one aspect beyond technology. And by doing that, we can, of course, position the vehicle for the policymaker to make sure it is integrated in the safety system or the mobility system, which you were referring to, Nan, as having to be reinvented. One of the questions I had, and I won't raise that because we touched upon it, is how much COVID-19 will actually accelerate that. I think we are in the middle of that phenomenon, but most likely it will not only be for the short term, it will be for mid and long term. We will see this system needing to be redesigned. So we have to be active in that process, making sure we take the opportunities that are there. And obviously, it then leads me to the question, which is a rhetorical question. If I look at the long term, how will motorcycles and motorcycling look at the Horizon 2030 and beyond? So companies have different solutions. They will all have their own answers to these kind of challenges. But for sure, there's food for thought from this exchange that can be can sort of make them even more aware about what is ahead and what needs to be done. On that, I think it's a very good bridge to handing back to Matthias from IFZ. You will be in the next sessions talking about very specific topics about technology. You will be talking about how the vehicles can become safer. You will be talking also about electromobility. So there's a lot of topics, very precise, contrary to these policy discussions that by definition are very wide, that will be really looking at hitting the nail on the head, if you like, when it comes to these priorities we've been touching upon in this discussion. So before I hand over to Matthias, first of all, my thanks to all of you for taking part in this roundtable. I think it was, at least for me, an interesting experience to have one of these online. I'm sure we will have more of these in the future because it allows a lot of people to get together. And probably if it weren't for these kind of tools, we would be just talking amongst ourselves. Here, the opportunities to reach out beyond the usual circle of participants, which I believe is really important. So on that, I would like to thank you all. Matthias, I would like to thank you also for the usual cooperation with ASEM. We find it's very productive, and we wish you all the best for the upcoming sessions. Thank you all, also those online, for joining us. and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I start again. Yes, Antonio, I think it was an excellent discussion from my point of view, and thank you very much for this interesting exchange of views. As we are used to from you, you have skillfully guided us through these very important topics. Of course, we would like to take this opportunity to thank once again the participants of this round who enriched the discussion and the conference with their expertise. I think we all have a pretty good insight into all around mobility, future mobility of PTW, and the safety strategies now, and also the impressions on these very important topics for today and especially for the future. There was a long way, of course, to go and a lot of preparation before all the participants could discuss side by side here on the screen. For this also many thanks from IFZ to all participants and of course the entire ASEM team who were in charge of organizing this excellent round. I think across Europe and indeed worldwide, the number of accidents and casualties involving powered two-wheelers is falling in a long-term trend. Not everywhere, of course, not everywhere yet, but we are all working on it, creating safety concepts and expanding and improving existing concepts. As the motto of previous IFZ conferences has already made clear, I think three major areas of rider, vehicle, and traffic environment must always be taken into account. Of course, all these areas are influenced by the very important interaction with sustainable policies. Regulations regarding connected mobility, continuous improvement of initial riding school situation, the expansion of advanced rider training and motorcycle-friendly infrastructure, as mentioned, are important pillars that require political decisions and increase motorcycle safety today and in the future. Certainly, very different priorities have to be set for each country, and the inclusion of all road users also plays a major role, a very important role. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we all agree that PTWs and exceptional riding dynamics convey a high level of riding pleasure. At the same time, however, the riding on two wheels is also determined by specific risk factors. And if you don't want to bury your head in the sand before that, you have to deal with the issue of two-wheel safety, from accident figures to technical solutions that will make a major contribution to reducing the number of accidents in the long term. I think that this discussion among the participants in this round showed us that above all, an exchange of views among each other can further pave the way for a safe coexistence in road traffic and will in the long term contribute to making the fascination of two-wheeled vehicles even safer. It is therefore important that we all seek the dialogue, whether in person on the spot or online, as we do today, and not only in this context of this conference. Because the exchange, the scientific exchange, is the basis for safe motorcycling tomorrow. I would now like to hand over the floor to my colleague, André Lang, who will now provide you with further details on this year's conference events, the sessions and questions and answers to the individual contributions. Andre, now it's your time.
Thanks, Matthias. This year's conference truly sets new standards. Never before has it attracted so much interest worldwide. Never before have the submitted papers been called upon so frequently. We are now talking about 3,200 visitors from 91 countries who attended our conference online. The core and heart of the conference has always been the focus of interest, the sessions section, where the papers were divided into different topic areas. There, over a period of 5 weeks, the contributions have been published step by step for the first time, from the first day on, with an amazing demand. We, as IFZ, would like to take into account this obviously great demand and will offer the traditional Forschungsheft. That's the research booklet containing all the long versions of the proceedings of the conference digitally, completely for free for the first time. Because we have seen that a lower threshold approach will meet an even greater interest in scientific findings. We will do so for the previous editions of our research booklets as well. We have recognized that it's a good idea, and so we're going to publish our proceedings on our webpage within the next few days as PDF documents. We are delighted and that our innovations, some of which were forced to be conceived, have been able to succeed and have clearly enjoyed a great popularity. Of course, this experience will have an impact on future conferences and IFZ events as well. And so within this year's new concept, the form of today's closing event is, although in reality not a real closing, but have a look for yourself. Will carry on taking place on the internet will have an effect, and one of the innovations of this year's International Motorcycle Conference is that from now on a question and answer section will be released for each of the 9 sessions on the IFZ website in the conference area. The path to it is shown here in the clip. You can easily reach it via the links placed on each session page and next to each contribution. Conference visitors have been using our service for weeks now and have not only accessed the papers and presentations, but also asked questions to the authors of the papers and presenters. Therefore, we can already see the first answers to the questions online on the newly created subpages of the papers and sessions. But not only that, there is still the possibility to submit questions to the authors and will continue to do so in the future. At this point, we enable a global dialogue between experts among each other and open the door also with a view to the next IFZ conferences, also for people who find it difficult or even impossible to participate in an analog version of the conference. We are very pleased with the questions submitted so far and the dialogue that is already taking place. We are also very pleased about the interest shown by those asking questions and the readiness of the authors to follow this new path for us as well. All participants, other research teams worldwide, or even young scientists will have the opportunity to use the online presence of this year's conference to contact the authors and ask questions for further knowledge. We are confident and do not want to have to give up the traditional way of meeting again within the framework of the International Motorcycle Conference in Cologne, but we are aware of how we can continue to expand it in the future. As you can see, this year's conference will echo and will continue to provide evidence in the future. We are looking forward to it. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for your support. Stay healthy, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yes, Andre, thank you for these informative insights and the explanation and announcement of the question and answer tool in the online conference area. From my point of view, this is a very important tool, especially for further scientific exchange beyond the current conference period. Let's move on now to our next and last item on today's program of this live event. As already mentioned at the beginning, the MSF, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation, is a central partner of IFZ in the events of the international motorcycle conferences. I would therefore now like to hand over the floor to Eric Pritchard, the acting president of the MSF, together with his colleague Ray Oakes, the vice president of training systems of the MSF, who's also well known to many of us from previous conferences. Eric will give an overview of the current situation on motorcycle safety in the USA. As we did not want to expect our colleagues from California to have to give lectures in the middle of the night, from their point of view, we have recorded the presentation of the two of them beforehand due to the time difference, as just said. Ladies and gentlemen, so the last word in the context of this conference and today's live event is due to the colleagues Eric and Ray from the MSF. Thanks a lot.
Greetings from the United States and the Motorcycle Safety Foundation. My name is Ray Oakes. I'm the Vice President of Training Systems for MSF. I'm responsible primarily for programs and course development, including instructor and rider coach recertification processes. It's my pleasure to be here. Certainly appreciate speaking with you. I've been involved with IFZ since 2002. I've been able to attend every conference, and oftentimes I've even served as a session chair or moderator, and I was honored to do that, and let's hope that happens in 2022. So just a reminder about MSF and my role is we're really about our rider education and training system. It's a system of several courses from Learn to Ride to Advanced Training, and we try to work on skills and behavior. That's why we have such an interest in the presentations provided during these sessions. So with that, I'd like to introduce our new president and CEO, Eric Pritchard. Eric?
Thanks, Ray. And thank you for welcoming the Motorcycle Safety Foundation to the 13th International Motorcycle Conference. Matthias has been most gracious in making it possible for us to participate this year, albeit across the globe and across time zones. And what an incredible job to make this conference succeed under the difficult and unusual circumstances all of us find ourselves in. I met many of you 2 years ago at the previous conference, and I really enjoyed my time with you and the city of Cologne. Since that conference, Tim Boucher, whom I think probably all of you know, has retired, and I was named the new president of MSF. Our work, like yours, is never ending, but working with people like Ray really makes the work a pleasure. Of course, both of us wish we could be there with you in person, a sentiment I'm sure that is shared by all the participants. Nevertheless, we shall carry on from sunny Southern California. I'll first share some observations about the U.S. motorcycle market. Ray will then provide an update on MSF activities and how MSF has responded to COVID, and he'll also share some thoughts and observations about the presentations, and then we'll wrap it up. So the U.S. motorcycle market is stronger than might be expected under the circumstances. Now, in January and February, we were seeing pretty strong sales, but then COVID hit and everything stalled in March. But then sales started to pick up, and they've continued to be stronger than expected. To give you some context, new motorcycle sales are up over 6% through June of 2020 compared to the January to June period in 2019. Off-highway motorcycle sales have been especially strong. New dual motorcycle sales are up over 20% through June compared to last year, and off-highway motorcycles are up over 50% through June. One relevant question is, why is that? It's counterintuitive in light of the economic conditions, because normally we think of rising unemployment as being inversely correlated to sales. As unemployment goes up, sales usually go down. And unemployment in the US is up as a result of COVID. Originally, the sales growth was explained away as a result of the economic stimulus checks that the government issued in the spring. But that can't be correct, because we're months after that and sales are still strong. We're way past any sort of stimulus effects. I believe that the stronger than expected sales are the result of three factors. First, dealers have made smart adjustments. They're doing things differently, in part because they have to. Contactless sales has led to a lot of adjustments in terms of customer service. So you're seeing things now like motorcycles delivered to your home, service appointments, the service actually being done in your driveway. I mean, these are big changes and certainly helps meet customers where they are. Second, and this is no surprise, but there are great products in all categories, right? The technology has never been better. The motorcycles have never been better. The riding gear has never been better. The aftermarket accessories have never been better. This is a great time to be riding a motorcycle. Third, and perhaps really this is the one we'll have to keep an eye on for some time to come, consumer behavior may be changing. There are no team sports, no concerts, no amusement parks, right? But people still want to do activities and they want to be safe. So what you're seeing, at least in the US, is a very strong demand for outdoor recreation, whether it's motorcycles, bicycles, camping, boating, motorhomes, fishing, all are up dramatically during this time. It really speaks to people's desire to do activities with their family and friends in a safe manner, outdoors, and motorcycling with its built-in social distancing and protective equipment immediately checks a lot of boxes for folks. It's going to be imperative for the US motorcycle industry to continue to meet customers where they are and provide products they want. And of course, for us to continue to deliver rider training. The next few years should be quite interesting. So with that background of the US market, Ray, please share some of the recent MSF activities.
Sure, Eric, thanks. Yeah, the COVID pandemic's had quite an effect since a lot of things have shut down and changed the training atmosphere, the training environment. As most of you know, MSF focuses on the human element, primarily in safety education training practices. Our focus is primarily on student safety, instructor and rider coach safety, administrator safety, and of course, rider safety overall, whether in a course or whether they're out riding on their own. So during this time, we've had the opportunity to increase our online opportunities. We have several e-courses in the works. We have added virtual reality 360-degree videos to some of our courses, and it's a pretty exciting time related to that to help both new and experienced riders. The other thing we spent some time doing, this virtual reality certainly is new to many of us, and we've done several professional development activities for our rider coaches. 2 or 3 times a month, we'll spend time doing online learning and interacting with the rider coaches through what we call VRITs, our virtual RITs, professional development activities. So turning to the courses, just generally speaking, the degree of training shutdown varied from complete shutdown, no training, to normal training as is, to modified training. So we kind of focused on what that modified training is going to be. So our standards remain unchanged, but the methods and some of the learning activities did have to be adjusted. We, of course, encouraged our sites to follow local and public health authorities, encouraged a lot of flexibility, especially when it comes to rescheduling or providing refunds or even canceling courses. When it came directly to the course operation, though, we emphasized sanitizing, disinfecting, hand washing frequently, of course, the recommended social distancing, and that's what changed a lot of our learning activities. You know, the use of masks and not sharing any equipment or materials. And of course, if anyone does show symptoms, then they would have to be dismissed. So we sent out some regulations related to that, and training is picked up in many areas throughout the country, in many of the states. And business is kind of back to usual in some states, but again, some remain shut down. Specifically, I'm not going to get into excruciating details here, but we provided interim lesson plans and materials for our instructors and rider coaches, and we provided new action steps for them to follow in this interim process till we can get back to what might be considered normal. So with that, I'd like to just make a few comments about the 13th Annual Motorcycle Conference. Certainly, there's been outstanding and interesting programs and sessions. We appreciate the topics related to our mission and vision, which is related to the rider-motorcycle interaction and the human element. And some particular topics that come to mind would be the skill level system, the trends toward electric mobility, human-machine interaction for hazard warning, anti-lock brake systems, licensing and skills training, instructor candidate selection practices, and that particular presentation and paper related to the U.S., arm versus body steering, leaning thresholds, autonomous emergency braking. So the conference was extremely rich for us, and we can integrate many of these concepts and ideas into our courses. And we look forward to more robust sessions in a couple of years and continue the work that's being done. And with that, I will turn it back over to Eric.
Thanks, Ray. Well, this year's conference really may be the greatest one yet, considering the high quality of presentations delivered under very difficult circumstances. The professionalism of the presenters and the organizers, it's been extraordinary. Of course, one of the reasons all of us enjoy conferences like this one is the opportunity to share ideas as we break bread and form new friendships. That is impossible this year, but this is not a permanent state. The virus will be controlled. We will gather together again. We will share again in person. It's a setback, but it's temporary. The rider training community is too strong, too organized, and too committed to be derailed by something temporary. Ray and I look forward to seeing all of you in Cologne in 2022, where we can share meals and some kulch and continue to share and grow our thinking about the future of rider safety. Thank you and stay safe.